Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, that I might find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into 2 groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes to attack one group, the group that is left may escape. Now we're going to jump down to 17 and go through 29. He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to, and where are you going, and who owns all these animals in front of you?' then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us." He also instructed the second and third and all the others who followed the herds, "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, 'Your servant Jacob is coming behind us.' For he thought, 'I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me.' So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in camp. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford to Jabbok. After he sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked, 'What is your name?' Jacob, he answered. The man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask my name?' Then he blessed him there. And now we're going to jump over to the next chapter, 33, and we're going to read 1 through 11. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down on the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau, he ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Esau looked up, and he saw the women and children. He asked, 'Who are these with you?' Jacob answered, 'They are the children God has graciously given your servant.' The female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next to Leah and her children came and bowed down. And last of all, Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, 'What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I've met?' 'To find favor in your eyes, my lord,' he said. But Esau said, 'I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself.' 'No, please,' said Jacob. If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably, please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need.' And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it." Brian, I welcome you up here to help us understand the stories.
Good morning. It's nice to see so many of us in the middle of the summer and so many children. Hearing about uh, Jacob dividing his family up into 3 different camps and thinking maybe that's not such a bad idea. Maybe we need to start splitting up. No, it's good to all be together. Well, for those of us who are joining us, we have been studying Genesis for the past several months. And specifically, we've been looking at the lens of families and kind of the dynamics that occur between those families. And just to put it bluntly, the families in Genesis are all pretty dysfunctional, pretty messed up, the things that happen. When Adam commits the first sin, he immediately throws his wife under the bus. Noah gets drunk and ends up cursing his grandson because he's feeling shamed by his son. Abraham marries 2 different women, and then inevitably there's envy and tension in the household, and so he casts one of his women and his oldest son out into the wilderness. These are messed up, dysfunctional, and in some ways very realistic families that we're reading about. And as uncomfortable as it is, there are a lot of lessons and kind of insights we can come from studying these family dynamics. For example, one thing that we've seen many times over is that children have a tendency to kind of absorb and repeat the mistakes or the sins, if you will, of their parents. Sometimes this is very obvious, such as when Isaac goes around lying to people saying that Rebecca is his sister, so that he doesn't have to admit that she's his wife, exactly in the same way that Abraham did with Sarah. Sometimes it's much more subtle, such as the way that Isaac shows favoritism towards one of his sons over the other, in a way that is strikingly reminiscent of the favoritism that his own mother showed toward him. And we also see that things tend to get worse and worse when they go unaddressed. Abraham blames his wife Eve for his own mistake. Cain takes it further and murders his brother Abel. By the time we're in Genesis chapter 6, we hear that there is violence in every person's heart just constantly in the world, because these dysfunctions, if left unchecked, can get worse and worse and worse. And it leaves us wondering, is there any hope for humanity? Are we just kind of trapped in these cycles of dysfunction? And many of us, if not all of us, can even look at our own lives and our own families and wonder, oh man, is there any hope of things getting better here? Perhaps we have seen tensions or fights that have lasted for years and years and years. Perhaps we've had hopes that things would get better, but in reality, they've either stayed the same or just gotten worse. Well, fortunately, today, we have a story that ends positively. Finally, there is a measure of hope. Because Jacob and Esau, the brothers who are the 2 ultimate rivals, the very symbols of sibling rivalry, are able to set aside their differences and reconcile, be reunited as brothers. So if this can happen for them, maybe there is hope for any one of us. And to appreciate that, I need to review some of the points of the story, although I have to say that I think Solomon did an excellent job of reviewing it already with the children, so I'll try to keep it brief here. As you might have heard, this rivalry goes all the way back to the womb. These are twin boys, and this Bible tells us that they're kind of wrestling with one another in the womb. But the real damage occurs as they're growing up. Jacob steals Esau's birthright and then later his blessing, using these kind of coercive and manipulative tactics. And Esau is so upset about this that he sets out to kill his brother Jacob. he wants nothing but the death of his brother. And so what does Jacob do? He runs. He flees to live with his uncle Laban in the land of Padam Aram. And there, when he arrives, he has absolutely nothing to his name. He had left everything behind to get there. And so he's kind of at the mercy of his uncle. But over the next 20 years, as he's living there, he ends up getting married, actually twice, which again doesn't turn out to be a good dynamic. But he has a large family, several children. He grows wealthy. At that time, wealth would have been measured primarily in terms of the amount of flocks, sheep, and herds that you had if you were in a tradition like Jacob's. And he had quite a few that he was able to grow and keep among himself. But also, because Jacob's problems follow him wherever he goes, his relationship with his uncle grows tense. His uncle's manipulating him. He's trying to push back. Things get bad enough that eventually he decides he needs to get out. And so he does what he always does when he faces dangerous situations. He flees. But this time he decides to head back to the land of Canaan, back to the land where he had come from. And this is where our text picks up today. When he's coming back, and he knows that it's been 20 years, so, maybe things had changed, but maybe not. He had no idea how his brother was going to respond. Was his brother going to let bygones be bygones? Had he been holding a grudge all of these years, and he would kill him immediately? We don't know. But he's desperate, and so he's heading back home. And that's when the text tells us, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Now, that doesn't explicitly tell us if Esau is coming to greet him or coming to hurt him, but the thought of having 400 men coming at you would certainly be one that would cause anybody to be intimidated. If Esau was intending to kill Jacob, this is how he would do it. He would come with an armed guard. So Jacob, always the schemer, is trying to think about a way to get out of this, a way to deal with this situation, and so he comes up with this plan. It says, "In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into 2 groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau attacks one group, the group that is left might escape." Now that is pretty low. He's basically throwing half of his family to the wolves in the hopes that the other half will be able to survive. Now later on in the story, the plan kind of develops, and so he splits them into 3 groups instead of into 2 groups. But this idea of kind of hiding behind his own family prevails. Text goes on to say, he instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to? And where are you going? And who owns all these animals in front of you?' Then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" A key phrase that I would note is that Jacob is becoming behind them. He is at the very back of this entourage of people who are coming to meet his brother. And so he also instructed the second, the third, and all the others who followed the herds, "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, 'Your servant Jacob is coming behind us.' For he thought, 'I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending ahead, and later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me.'" I mean, this is all about him. Perhaps if I can give him all of these gifts, if he can see my poor, innocent, lovely family, his own relatives, maybe then he will let me go. I mean, this has all of the characteristic sins of his ancestors. You know, Abraham was hiding behind Sarah in order to protect himself. He's doing the same thing. Isaac showed favoritism to one son over the other. He's certainly letting his kids know who are the favorites by dividing them into groups, with the least favorite group going first. But this plan also had one unintended effect. It left him alone. Now, I can tell you, as a working father with a working spouse who has 3 children, that being alone is not something that happens to me very often or very easily. I imagine that this was even less true to a man who had 11 sons, who knows how many daughters, and 2 wives and 2 concubines. It was probably a very rare thing for him to be alone. But in this moment, something extraordinary happened. It was indeed the turning point of Jacob's life. It says, that night Jacob got up and took his wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled him till daybreak. Wait, what? A man wrestled him. What's that last part? A man wrestled him till daybreak. That's odd. That's an odd line. Who is this guy? Where does he come from? Why is he wrestling? Why are 2 adult men just wrestling with each other? This is a very odd passage, and there's not really any explanation as to what's going on here. Now, sometimes when you're studying the Bible and you come across an odd passage like this, you can study the context. You can learn a bit about how cultures and expectations were different in ancient times than they are today, and then it makes a little more sense. This is not one of those cases. The closer you look at this text, the weirder it gets. So, for example, we might think, well, okay, maybe this guy was like a robber or something who was trying to jump Jacob, but the text tells us that he's at the ford of Jabbok, which was a rural kind of place in the middle of nowhere. And if you were setting out to rob people, this is not where you would go. This is not a place where people are passing by regularly, so that doesn't make sense. I think, well, maybe he was just like a traveler that he very randomly bumped into. Well, that doesn't work either, because he runs into him at night. Now, Jacob and his family were traveling at night because they were under very distressing circumstances. They were afraid that Esau was about to kill them. But most of the time, people did not travel at night. It was dangerous to travel at night. You couldn't see. There were wild nocturnal animals out. And so people did almost all of their traveling during the day. So you think, well, I guess this is just one of those stories where maybe they accidentally kind of left some details out, you know? They just describe him as a man, and that was kind of accepted. And it is true that there are stories in the Bible where we're given characters that are anonymous, or we don't know a lot about their background. But this is more than that. Because it's not just that we don't know this man's name, it's that the text refuses to tell us his name. At one point, Jacob says, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And that's that. He never answers. He never tells you who he is. And so there's just this bizarre encounter of this man coming and wrestling him. But whatever it was, whatever it meant, it had a profound and life-changing effect on Jacob's life. Just want to highlight a few of the ways that it changed him. First, it hurt him. It left him wounded. The text tells us, when the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, He touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." In the course of wrestling with this random person in the middle of the night, he injured him in a way that left a permanent mark on Jacob's body. But Jacob insisted on holding on, of gritting his teeth and living with the pain until he got a blessing out of this experience. Then the man asks, "What is your name?" And he says, "Jacob." And the man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." The second thing that comes out of this interaction is Jacob is renamed. His entire identity is reshaped. And in fact, Israel means literally one who wrestles with God. So this becomes a central part of his identity. The third, it changes the way that he acts, that he lives his own life going on from here. Now, this is subtle, but there's an important detail that we're not supposed to miss when the story of his encounter with Esau picks up. So after he has this random wrestling episode where he's injured, but his name is changed, the text tells us that Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants, and he himself went on ahead and bowed to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Now the key line that I want you to notice here is the phrase, "He himself went on ahead." You remember, up until this point, his plan was to stay in the back, was to let all of the other family members go first in the hopes that they would appease him, or if things went wrong, then he would know that his brother was out to kill him and he'd have a chance to run away. But after this encounter, he decides to stop fleeing from his problems, and he goes to the front of the caravan. He himself is the first person to talk to his brother Esau. And he puts it all in front of him. He shows his brother Esau himself. He makes it known that he is sorry, that he feels bad for what he's done. And he makes an interesting comment, saying that seeing you is like seeing the face of God. It's as though this mysterious person whom he wrestled with back by the ford of Jabbok influenced the way that he would see everybody else thenceforward. This is the turning point of his life. And it results in him and Esau being reconciled. So what is happening here? What are we to make of this strange episode of wrestling with God? Well, I've always found this to be a particularly powerful phrase. There's something about this metaphor that just draws me in, that we are invited to wrestle with God. And I think there's a few things that we can learn about it from this story. Whatever else it means, it seems to involve confronting your weaknesses, your faults, your sins. You see, Jacob had been known for running away. He ran away from his brother Esau. He ran away from Laban. He was one who was inclined, whenever problems came up, to use deceit and manipulation to try to get out of it. But when this man comes and confronts him and by the ford of Jabbok, he faces him. He doesn't try to run away. And that's a hard thing to do. Maybe a phrase that our society would use, one that I found myself trying to avoid as I was writing drafts of this sermon, is that it's like facing yourself. You know, it's like taking a good hard look in the mirror and looking at your own flaws, your own baggage, what we contribute to situations. And that metaphor is fine, except that really who we're confronting in the biblical narrative isn't ourself, but God. The one who has perfect vision, the one who is holy above all. And that is an intimidating thing. It is intimidating to look at God, knowing that God sees us exactly as we are, that nothing about ourselves is hidden before God. And it can even be painful. But Jacob decided it was worth the pain to be able to wrestle with God. It's also significant that he was alone, because he wasn't hiding behind anyone else. Now you see, going all the way back to Adam and Eve, we find that one of the most basic human instincts when we have done something wrong, when we have made a mistake, is to blame somebody else. Well, she gave me the fruit. The serpent put the idea in my head. And the fact is that those responses aren't necessarily wrong. If we find ourselves in kind of these dysfunctional battles with family members, it's quite possible, probably I'd even say true, that other family members do things that drive us nuts, have hurt us, that we have reasons to be suspicious or angry or distrustful or whatever else. But it's also almost always true that we bring something to it. And when we're blaming and fighting and denying, we don't want to look at that part. But in these moments, when we are wrestling with God, it's not about anybody else. It's just about God and us. And that can be a transforming experience. And finally, in wrestling with God, Jacob discovered who he truly was. He had to carry around this identity of being Jacob, which means one who grabs his brother's heel, but which also, that's an idiom in ancient Hebrew, which would suggest that you're a liar, that you're a deceitful person. And he just kind of lived into this identity that he had been given his whole life. Of course, he was the second born. He was going to have to fight and cheat and run and steal in order to survive in a world of more powerful people. But that's not how God saw him. In facing God, he had to face his flaws. He had to face his shortcomings, and it hurt. But he also learned that he was not just Jacob, he was Israel. He had a name and an identity in God in which he could be secure. And he came out of that wrestling match knowing who he was. And in that confidence, being willing to face his brother, even though he still didn't know whether his brother was going to kill him or not. Because the reality is that we are in a world where there are a lot of things that we can't control. And that's a hard lesson that you just have to keep learning at each stage in life. Maybe we've made mistakes in the past. We can't undo them. Maybe we wish that the people who are closer to us in our lives would just change. They would just fix this or that. We can't make it happen. Maybe we'd hope that the people who come after us won't make the same kinds of mistakes that we do. We can't even guarantee that. But what we can do is that we can find peace with God in who we are in our relationship with God. And then no matter what the circumstances are, we can be anchored in that. And that peace is what was necessary to fuel the reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. Now there's more to it than that. We're going to explore another story of reconciliation and look more at the dynamics between the family members in our final sermon in this series with Joseph and his brothers next week. But it starts with that peace. And while we may not be able to guarantee that anyone or anything else will change, there is hope in finding that God knows us and loves us and sticks with us, even in the midst of dysfunction.